Good morning. Welcome to Facebook Live. Stephanie Erickson, family caregiving expert. I've got a guest with me, Matt Vecchio. I'll introduce him in just a sec. So many of you know who follow me that I work with seniors and their families. And as a social worker, I'm constantly going into residences and hearing families' struggles about, am I choosing the right one? Did I choose the right one? Now that we're here, this is not the right one. And sometimes things work out really well also. There's also a lot of varieties with residences. Some are really retirement residences and they don't have a lot of services. Some residences have a continuum of care, so you can start in the retirement autonomous phase and then slowly move to maybe other floors or levels depending on what kind of care you need. And then some are just straight up long-term care residences for those that have, severe difficulties in terms of mobility or cognitive difficulties. So it's very confusing. It's very overwhelming. So I thought I would bring in my friend and expert, Matt Vecchio. Hello, Matt.
Hi, Stephanie. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So Matt is the owner of, I want to get the full title right, because I always say Lianas Services, but it's not the full thing. It's Lianas Services, Retirement Home Search and Transition Support. It's a free service. What Matt does is he helps families choose that right residence. So he gets to know the, I'll say client, which would be the senior, all of his or her needs, gets to know the families, priorities, etc., and then helps find the right place for them. And if they're already in a place and want to move, of course, he can do that as well. He is also a certified professional consultant on aging. And he's also the host of Life Unrehearsed, which is on CJAD 800 here in Montreal on Sundays at 4 o'clock. And actually, Matt and I used to host that show together.
Yes, we did. You were the first one with us.
So, but anyways, we're still friends. It's still working.
Oh, okay. Yeah. We had some fun times.
Yeah, we did have fun times. Congratulations on your 100th show, by the way, with Corey.
Thank you.
Okay, so Matt, super overwhelming. And it's never really feels like the right time to find a place. I know with my grandmother, she was living autonomously in quite a big home. And she was there for probably 3 years debating, is it time to move? But I don't want to move. But now I'll lose my privacy. I have to get rid of all my things. I have to downsize. I mean, there were so many complications in her head as to the move. Once she made the transition and she's in an autonomous retirement residence, she was really happy, but it was a 3-year process. So from the senior's perspective, what are the things that people are typically thinking about when they're starting to ponder a move?
Yeah, and that's probably the biggest issue. And part of the issue is the stigma about residences, especially that generation. They're probably used to what they've heard on the news or seen for many, many years, which is your typical nursing home at the long-term care level. They don't realize there's a whole other segment. The senior living industry has just blossomed over the last 10, 20 years. There's so many more options. So there's this fear. It's the lack of knowledge and the thinking that, oh my goodness, only old people are there. It's probably just wheelchairs staring out the window. So that's the psychology of it all. It's one of the biggest challenges. And it's maybe their family home. There's tons of memories and they don't want to leave home. There's cost issues. They're worried it's going to cost a fortune. Do I have enough money to last in if I go to a residence? So there's a lot of these overwhelming thoughts, and sometimes and very often they just shut it down and forget it. I'm not even going to consider it.
And one of the things that maybe it's just my own bias and my own personal fear, but it's like, once I make that move, is this the beginning of the end? You know what I mean? I've making the leap, and now I'm in that part of my life. And it's like, you don't really want to do it. My mother-in-law is turning 90 in July, and she's having all of these knee problems, having trouble walking up and down the stairs. We've been talking to her for years. Cognitively, she's fine. But she's in a lot of pain going up and down these stairs, and there's no elevator. But I talked to her again this weekend. She's like, nope, not happening.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because you're right. They do think maybe this is the last stage of life. The Lianas logo is actually a new leaf. And it's done intentionally that way because we very, very often see an uptick in both cognitive and physical strength. It takes a while to actually get over that fact that maybe this is the right thing. But the line we hear the most, Stephanie, is, I should have done this a few years ago. It's by far, both from the adult children and from mom or dad. And we hear that a lot because it really is a new lease on life.
Yeah, I have to take this toy for my dog. It's driving me crazy. Jagger.
Good old Facebook Live. Oh, I like that.
It's very noisy. He's very happy, but it's quite noisy and it's distracting me. It's true though, Matt, like at the end, people say, oh, I should have done this sooner. So you kind of gave me an idea of the senior's perspective. I do find though that the urgency factor is much higher on the family side. So what are the things that families say to you about why? And the words I hear is, my mom has to move. She needs to move. It's not like, oh, let's just explore the option. It's like, no, it should be happening.
Yeah, this is the toughest part, the toughest phase, if you will, where usually there's denial involved or just stubbornness. And the adult children see a different perspective, particularly the daughters. Most of our meetings are with the adult daughters, and they clearly see that mom and or dad are in a vulnerable position. They should not be at home, and it becomes so challenging. So we very often strategize with the children about, okay, we need to have perhaps a couple discussions, plant some seeds. It's the stigma, right? They're worried about what's out there. So tours are actually a very important part of our process, and we go through tours, narrow it down to the top 3 or 4 so they can actually see, you know what, I could see myself fitting in here. I had a whole different perspective of it. So that helps with the stigma part of it. But a lot of it is time, communication, planting seeds. Maybe they have a friend that moved. Maybe they know a neighbor that moved. Or there's trigger events. Maybe there's, God forbid, a broken hip and their hospitalization and the doctors are having conversations. Maybe there's cognitive issues where they left the oven on and they didn't realize it, and now it starts to become a little bit more serious. The kids are nervous and they have to be more proactive, and a gentle nudge becomes a little bit more of a forceful nudge.
So let me ask you, because you've mentioned a lot of stuff there, and I want to get to the tours, because then we're going to talk about, okay, what are we supposed to be looking for? But just back to the kids, you mentioned a few things. You mentioned a trigger issue, which would have to do with, a fall, a cognitive problem. There was some sort of a crisis or an acute event that happened in the home. But what are the other things that the kids are saying to you? If there wasn't an acute event, what is it? Just like a slow decline of cognitive, my mom's confused, or just I worry about her and I'm afraid she's not eating enough, even if cognitively she's okay. Like what do the kids say to you?
Yeah, the two main issues are physical and cognitive, and I'm going to throw a third being financial. Okay, and if I could address those. Physical is simply, my goodness, mom has to go or dad has to go up the stairs every day to get into their bedroom, and they have a walker or they have a cane. There's a risk of slip and fall. Yeah. There was a fall, didn't have to be hospitalized, but my goodness, they called and there was a panic. So physical is certainly a big part of it. Cognitive is a much more challenging one because it's not, as you know, with dementia or even onset dementia, early stages, you don't go from A to Z. It's a long transition. And usually,
with dementia, just to pick up on that point, is that one of the symptoms is sometimes poor judgment, poor insight. So the person who's experiencing the problems doesn't recognize it or even remember that it's happening. So that, puts a kink in it as well.
It's to them it's normal, and then if you have adult children, particularly out of town kids that would come in every 3-4 months and they see drastic differences, my goodness, they repeated the same question and this wasn't like mom, and so that's when the red flags start coming. If I could address the last one, which is the financial part of it. Sometimes we hear about financial and elder abuse and kids are greedy and wanting inheritances. The reality is, I'm going to say, it's usually the opposite. Usually it's mom or dad don't want to spend their money. Mm-hmm. They have the money. They're savers. That generation, they save. They don't want to spend. They never thought of renting. And they work so hard because they had nothing. This is a big challenge because the kids are saying, it's okay. We don't need an inheritance. And whatever is at the end is great. Spend it on yourselves. And it's very challenging to get that generation to spend money on themselves. And sometimes what helps is like even a financial planner, we get them involved to show that do you realize for 10 or the next 15 or 20 years, you're going to be okay. It doesn't actually cost as much as what you think. And if you see it in writing and you see that, then you see a little bit of relief saying, okay, maybe I could at least consider this.
Yeah. So now let's get to the tour part. So I want some tips out there. So Matt, you're bringing me and my mom, and we're starting to tour a residence. You've chosen a few that would be appropriate for my mom's situation. First of all, before you even choose which ones are appropriate, because we can visit 30, which no one has the time or the energy to do. So what's the first decision-making process to say, okay, I'm going to visit these 3?
Right. So we create a needs assessment or client profile. There's probably about 20 or 30 questions we ask. When we go on tours, there's actually a 70-point checklist going on tours. But in that client profile, we always start with care requirements. Okay, what are your care requirements? It may be, I'm independent. I want my full kitchen. I want to still cook, but I want to be in more of a social environment. Maybe there's a dining room. So they might just need very limited care. Then we get into things like budget. We get into things like likes and dislikes. We want to match up the culture of the person with the culture of the residents of that senior community. That's a big part of it. Language, religion comes into play. Geography also comes into play. Is it near, if you're still autonomous, is it near grocery stores? Or if you're not autonomous, is there a shuttle bus that can take you to a grocery store and deliver groceries right to your door?
Right.
So
Okay.
a lot of factors do go into us narrowing down. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of retirement residences, and I should stress that this is not necessarily just nursing homes, right? This is
Right.
full senior communities.
Right.
And then from there, we try to narrow it down to the top 2 or 3, and then we organize tours of those 3, 4, sometimes 5 residences.
Okay, so now I'm walking on a tour with you. There's a 70-point checklist. We don't have time to go over 70 points. So talk to me about, as we're walking through, what are you pointing out? I mean, I know from my experience, I've kind of said to people, first of all, try and go at a time when people don't know you're coming. So that's really good, because then you kind of you're not trying to catch people, but you just want to see what normal life is when people aren't prepping. And the other thing is try a meal, because food is important and we want to like the meal. So those are a couple things that I know about. What else do you point out to families as you're walking through the residence?
Right. So just on that meal point, that's a very good point, because one, they're offering free meals, and those that don't offer a complimentary meal, well, why would they not spend that investment on a potential new client? So we tend to stay away from them. What are they hiding? The reason why lunchtime is also very good is because not only do you get to taste the food is a big part of senior communities, but you get to see the other residences. You get to see the atmosphere, the culture. Is it lively? Is it vibrant? Are people enjoying themselves, or is it a depressing environment? So that's a very important point in terms of, we always try to have a meal if we can. But stepping it back a bit, sometimes there's these beautiful big residences with tons of activities and social, so those might be appropriate for some people. Some we've had, no, we don't want that. Mom or dad is more introverted. We never want to keep mom or dad in their rooms. Okay, this is the beauty of residences. They say, oh my goodness, how are they going to go in a 1-bedroom apartment? The reality is they're only there maybe to eat sometimes or watch television. Most of the time they're out of their apartment taking advantage of the common areas. So activities are important, but care, we have to go back to care. What are your care needs today, and what will your care needs be tomorrow? Because it's no use going to a retirement residence and you've got severe mobility issues that don't offer much care from that perspective, and you're going to have to move in a year from now. So it has to start with that, and then we try to figure out, okay, do you want a bigger type residence, or sometimes, believe it or not, the 9, 10, 11, 12 senior retirement communities, particularly for cognitive issues, are actually a lot more appropriate than some of the bigger ones.
That's okay. So that's really interesting. And it sounds to me like your focus, like one of the priorities, is about care. And of course, we can never predict, what's going to happen. I know when my grandma chose her place, as I was mentioning early, she's in a fully autonomous place. This is in Los Angeles, but connected to that place, she has priority to get into this long-term Jewish residence, which is very important for her, is to remain in a Jewish environment. And she has priority. If something were to happen, she hasn't needed it for years and years. Fingers crossed, she never will. But that was a consideration when she chose that place, was the eventuality, potentially, of needing care. Now, if a senior says to you, I don't want any continuum of care, I don't even want to be associated with the fact that potentially I'm going to have some issues, but the children are like, oh God, mom, come on, please, because we don't want to have to go through this again. How do you manage that and help the family choose a place?
Yeah, in our assessment, we'll have a very good idea as to what type of care will be required in the short term or long term. So, for example, if mom is saying, I don't want even to go to a place that has that continuum of care. Well, if they're independent and they're still going to be cooking and the kitchen is fine, then no problem. It may be good for 10, 11, 12 years. So from the adult children's perspective, oh my goodness, but we don't want mom to transition again. If you're going to be fine, you can never predict anything, but if you could obviously tell they're cognitively fine, physically fine, then that's not an important factor anymore. It's the quality of life. Maintain their dignity and pride, their independence by having best of both worlds in a retirement community, but could still access a lot of the social. If we do see in the assessment that there's perhaps some denial that there are obvious mobility or cognitive issues, then we have to really start leaning towards those continuum of care residences.
Yeah. And what are the things that are the like no-goes when you walk in a residence? I mean, I know because here in Montreal, like every single residence, you probably already are avoiding. But for those who are watching this and they don't have someone like yourself helping them along, what would be your like no-go zone if you walk in a place and see this? Get the heck out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, accreditation, first of all, you need to be accredited. Let's check that out first and foremost. Most will be accredited, but if you ask and they can't produce anything, then right away out there. Cleanliness and environment is very, very important. If you actually see an unclean environment right in front of you, could you imagine behind the scenes? It's not being well kept up. The kitchen might be dirty. So cleanliness and environment is extremely important. We always like to judge based on the atmosphere. If you see the atmosphere that you could see yourself in, and it is vibrant and energetic, that's a very good sign. We always, when we go on tours, we'll actually stop some people. The salesperson or that consultant taking us on tour might not like that, but we'll stop someone randomly. Hey, how do you like this place? And it's a bit risky from the sales consultant. They're crossing their fingers, right?
Yeah.
But that's a nice way to get a true reaction of a resident, unsolicited. It's not a sales perspective, and usually you could tell right away whether we are in a good place or not with talking to these residences.
So a lot of it, to me, it sounds like it's kind of like a gut feeling because you're just feeling, do I belong here? Do I fit? And what is the atmosphere like? And there's probably not a lot of like tangible things because many of them are going to have the checklist. Oh, activities, check. Good food, check. Services, check. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right place for you. So it's really about getting out there and getting a feeling of the residence.
And also that's part of what we try to bring to the table too, because we're in the residences all the time. So they can rely on us because we've been there and we've had feedback from people that have moved. So a lot of people lean on us saying, okay, what do you think? And also friends and family, neighbors.
Uh-oh. Matt just cut out.
You saw that went up for a second, yeah.
Cut out for a second, Matt. So you were saying also friends, families, neighbors. Say it again.
Yeah, exactly. If they know someone that's been in this particular residence, they lean on them. We tend to rely on people we can trust that are credible. It may be a neighbor, it may be your financial person, an accountant. They know someone that's been there, so lean on them to see if they're happy there as well.
Okay, so as we wrap it up, Matt, we've talked about a lot of different factors: location, services, continuum of care, the variety of nursing, activities, and I'll throw in for Dana Morrow because I know she wants me to say this, activities should be run by a special care counselor or a recreation therapist. So find out what the level of training is for those coordinating the activities. Thank you,
Dana. And Dana's right. Activities are absolutely important. Even if they're not going to go, you eventually go to a concert. You eventually do an activity. One little point about, sometimes we go on tours and they show the nice, wonderful pool, how spectacular it is. The next question we'll ask is, when's the last time mom was in a pool? And if the answer is 20 or 30 years ago, well, that's a sales pitch now. Let's forget about the pool. Let's concentrate on what mom needs. Others, osteoporosis, physical, pools are actually a good thing. Aquafit, so that could come into play in terms of the activities.
However, for a pool, I'll play devil's advocate. My friend's dad was in a residence that had a pool. He never went in it. However, the residence allowed grandchildren. and he enjoyed it because she was going every weekend, bringing her little kids, and he was watching them swim. So that would be the next question. Okay, mom hasn't been to the pool, but can I bring my kids?
Actually, yeah, that's a very good point. I was in a residence just last week. They actually had to put in a schedule for family swims now on weekends because the kids were there all the time.
Isn't that great, though? That's
It
really
is.
great.
It's
One
wonderful.
last point before I ask you for your final thoughts, Matt. What about staff ratios? For those who do need care, do you have a recommendation for staff ratios?
Yeah, it's hard to give an exact number, but let's put it this way: at a CHSLD or a nursing home level, 1 to 8 seems to be the standard. That means one
Because that's
staff for
full
every.
care. For those who aren't in Montreal, we're talking about full care residences where there's heavy care.
Yeah, long-term care. And then, so it's important for care. And then that ratio can go lower in more independent type environments where, you're still going to have pull cords, you still have access to a nurse or a doctor when you need it, but then you don't have to be as hung up on the staff to resident ratio if care levels aren't so important.
Okay, so Matt Del Vecchio, I have to say the full name, Lianas Services Retirement Home Search and Transition Support. Matt, what are your last thoughts? Okay, families are overwhelmed. They're heading out there tomorrow. 2 things that they should not forget when they're visiting. 2 things.
Yeah, the other side is not so bad. That's the stigma of residences. The industry is changing rapidly, so it's not as bad as what you think it is. You still have to be vigilant, still have to do your homework, but the stigma of retirement living is better than it has ever been. And also be patient with mom or dad. Be patient, plant your seeds, open communication. Yes, you may know that it's time or they have to do it, but be patient, and eventually they will come around if you're open with them. Don't make them think that you're after them and you're against them. Then it becomes adversarial, and then they become even more resistant and stubborn.
Thank you, Matt. You want to give your website?
Sure, lianasservices.com. Lianas, Lianas, which is just an acronym of the 3 kids, as you know.
Yes, I know. Nobody else knows. Okay, well, thanks a lot, Matt, and maybe we'll have a discussion about another senior transition issue another time. Thanks.
Well, thanks for having me, Stephanie.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.